just a few words to kind of lead us off. The intention for this webinar is just to cover for sure the basics of the formula field, and then get into some of the more advanced functions. I want to show you the advanced formula editor, which has quite a bit of capability. It does have some maybe different syntax than you've seen in other tools. So I want to make sure that we cover that and let you know how to navigate it, and then answer any questions that you have. We've got a few scenarios that we'll run through just to kind of show you the flow, show you how to build things, show you what's possible. Obviously, we won't be able to cover every single formula function and capability. So if there's something you really in particular want more detail about, please enter that question, or just jump right in and ask it voice. Let me share my screen to get us underway. All right, Emma, did that pop up? Okay, perfect. So as we get in, I'm already in a solution. You can see up here just a bit of terminology for those of you who are newer to the SmartSuite platform. Up here, we have the solution name. That's what appears here on your home screen. And then we have a variety of applications. And I've pre-configured a few things so that it's a little easier for us to jump in and actually get to the meat of building and configuring formulas. We're going to start off with a fairly simple scenario here, where I've got something that you might run across in everyday business with an invoices app, and I've got a couple of sample invoices, and they are linked to line items. So we're constructing an order here, and this is a pretty typical scenario where you have this type of data with a linked record field pointing at, here we've got our sample SKUs, and they all have their individual unit price and a quantity. And that's great to get started. We can link all of those together. You can see those linked here. But what I really want at the invoice level is I want the total for all of these individual items multiplied by the quantity. And then I want to be able to roll it all back up and get kind of the grand total for the entire invoice here. Fortunately, with SmartSuite's formula field, we make this pretty easy. There are a number of ways to add a field. You can either add a field from one of the columns. You see this option to add field to the right, or just click on the plus in the header bar, and you have the option to come in here and select one. Search is always handy. And in this case, the default formula pops up, and we have what we call a simplified interface presented to us. And actually, this fits perfectly with this particular scenario, because all we need is a simple math function. So let's call this subtotal. And right here, without doing anything else, without even having to jump into the advanced editor, I can just come in here, select my quantity. I want to multiply it. And we've got our different math operators here that you can select from. And then I'm going to select unit price. That's it. You could optionally add some help text to describe this. If it were a more complicated function, you may want to give your end users a little bit more context as to what's being calculated and what that value means. But in this case, that's all we need. We'll add the field, and you can see that it's taking these numbers and it's multiplying them, putting that value pretty well immediately into this field. If it is a larger, more complicated calculation, there may be a little bit of delay, or if you have hundreds or thousands of records, you'll see a spinning icon here as the value is recalculated. And that'll happen anytime that you come up here and maybe you change the formula as we get into more advanced ones, and you'll see those values updating. Now, this is one of my individual pet peeves here, is that you see how we're multiplying a price by a quantity. We're displaying it as a regular number right now. Don't worry, this is already on the list. We're going to add a capability to come in here and specify the output type when you're outputting the number. It's also another important thing to mention as we get underway. Formulas output a value in one of three formats: a number, as we're showing here, a date, or text. And all of the possible values that can be produced by that formula have to be of the same type. And I'll show you how that comes into play as we get into more advanced formulas. All right, everyone with me so far? And Brian and Emma, feel free to jump in if you're monitoring the questions and just present them so that I can cover it while we're running through it. So now
actually answer that question right away.
Okay, perfect.
I don't know if you meant to, but someone asked that, why isn't it not formatted as a number?
No,
so,
just
good timing.
From experience, I know that that's one of the first things that gets asked. So I wanted to make sure that we touched on that and that we're on top of that one. Okay.
One more
now
question.
That we've got our sure.
So what about other types like integer, rational numbers, or percent?
They're available here as well. And many of the times that you're going to want to manipulate numbers of varying types, you're going to do it in the advanced editor. And that's a great segue into this view where we're able to do things like round a value. So if I wanted to take this quantity times unit price and round it, I can do that right here. I can specify to what decimal place, and there we go. We do support, just like in our numeric fields, if I modify one of these, you see the level of precision. These are all treated as decimals, and we have up to 6 decimal precision. So all of those values are always preserved, but you can round them if you don't want all of that precision presented back out by the formula. All right. So now let's take our subtotals and go back over to our invoice record. What I want to do is take the sum of the ones that are linked to each invoice, and I can show the invoices that are linked here too, just so that we see we've got 3 of them that are associated with invoice 1, 1 that's associated with invoice 2. Now I want to go roll those up. So I'm going to come over to our invoices app. I'm going to add another formula field. And in this case, we're going to have to use the formula editor, as in fact, I don't have any results. Those number fields are in that linked record. We'll call this total and toggle our advanced editor. Now, a few things to note about the advanced editor. For one, up here where we have some example text, this is where you type your formula. You can also set help text when it's in advanced mode. But down here, you have a bunch of kind of helpers where we're listing all the fields that you can interact with. If you click on one of these, it gives you some information about what type of field it is, how you refer to it. And if you keep scrolling, you'll see that we have a list of operators. So doing equality comparisons, dividing, subtracting, all of those types of things. And then a whole list of functions. Now, the syntax that we're going to use to build our formulas, if you've ever built Excel formulas, you're going to feel right at home, as it's very similar. And what we're going to do is we're going to start out by selecting our line items field. When you highlight one of these, you can click Use, and it will insert that field reference in the correct format for you. You also have the option of just typing. And when you enclose that field name in square brackets, and when you complete that square bracket, if it exactly matches one of the names of the field, it's going to turn blue. So that's your indication that you have a valid reference. Now, line items is sort of unique in that it's a linked record field. So here, after I've typed it, if I type a period, see how this list of fields just changed? Now I have a list of all of the fields that I can refer to, including my subtotal field. If I click Use again, now I have a reference through that linked record to the subtotal field. But you can see this formula doesn't like me yet. It's giving me an error message saying that I need to use an aggregate function. The reason for that is that line items is referring to multiple values. So what this is actually an array of numbers. So it's a list of numbers that's being returned, which doesn't make sense in this context. So I would just have that list of subtotals. I need to do something with it. And in this case, I want to sum it. You see that when I typed sum in an open bracket, sum turned green. Green means that that's a valid function in the formula builder. So Once it's turned green, you know that you've got something that you can use to perform some action on the values that you're referencing. And you see that this list just narrowed down to show me sum and SUMIF. In this case, I'm just going to use the straight sum function and take every value that's there and add them together. And then I put a closing parentheses and see that my error message went away. And now I'm going to take every one of those line items and its subtotal field and add them up.
Hey, Peter,
I click.
what if
Yes.
the values are text?
Aha, great question. Let's do something here that returns a different type. We'll just call this text example. Back to our formula editor. We're going to find our line items again, period. And now let's say that I wanted to get this skew value. Again, it says that I need an aggregate function, but in this case, skew is text as opposed to the numeric values that we were looking at before. There is a text concat function that can be used to format those. So if I do concat line item reference to skew, add that field, it's going to bring back the entirety of the list. Now, I'm planning to enhance this one as well, because right at the moment, concat just puts every bit of text directly together with no separator. We're going to enhance it to allow you to include like a comma space separator. So this is a little bit more useful and more readable. But for now, you can get those values back. It could be handy when you know that there's only a single value and you just want to display it here. So simple enough. Once again, our total isn't formatted as currency, but we do have an accurate total and it's referencing back. You can kind of do a little quick math and see that these are probably in range. Here we've got 2750. There's only one of those. And these other three add up to 554.40. So we've got our total. Pretty easy. Any questions so far? All right.
What about a new line?
A new line in terms of
when you're doing the roll up, if you
Mhm.
could go back to that other field where you did the aggregate function, you said that, yeah, okay, so concatenate, okay. You said that you're going to be able to have like a comma separated list. Well, instead of separating by comma, what if you had wanted to have all of your options come in as a new line? Table, they had like an array join. They had an array join function, and with an array join, you could pick your own separator. And with that separator, you could choose a \n, which is the key, which is the variable for new line. And so all of your array lists will show up on a new line instead of just it bunched up the way it is, where it's returning.
Right.
Can't remember the
Great
word.
point. And you read our minds because that's exactly how we're going to do it. What the formula is going to look like is this.
Okay.
You'll be able to reference and then specify what separator you want.
What separator you want.
That separator could be something like that. It could be a tab character, or it could be a new line character.
Gotcha. The other thing is, what about when you are wanting to specify, you want to limit your results? So let's say I want the skew from the line items linked record, but I only want the line items that have yet to be paid. I would want to filter those options somehow. How do you do that? Or is that even possible?
Let me show you what is possible now. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're planning on doing in the future to enhance it even more. So what we do have is this other function called SUMIF. So if you're working with numbers, what you're able to do, and let's click on this, and it'll give you an example. It supports criteria and then a reference to the thing that you want to roll up. So before we do this, let's exit out of here. And let's say that our line items field had, let's add a a yes, no field, and just arbitrarily, let's call it approved. And maybe only a couple of these are approved for purchase. You can use that SUMIF, add our formula back here, get back into advanced editor, call it conditional sum. And now what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to reach through that line items linked record. And you can see that we've got our approved field in here. Let's use that. And I'm going to say it's equal to yes. If that's true, then what I want to do is, once again, get our line items. It's not two L's. And notice when it's misspelled, it turns black. If it's not blue, you don't have a correct field reference. And here we're going to specify that we want subtotal to be summed only if this condition's true. See the difference? Now, if I come over here and let's toggle that, and all of a sudden it shows up. So that's easy and it's available for numerics. Here are some of the other things that are available. We can average if, count if distinct, which is only going to count each unique value. And then we're going to talk a little bit about dates here as well, but as well as just conditional logic statements, and we'll use that here in a minute. Make sense?
Yes.
The thing that I wanted to mention that we're going to be adding is the ability to essentially do that array type of field with a condition similar to this, so that if I wanted to match on a date, or if I wanted to match on a status value or something to that effect, I could use it in the context of that array and then feed those values to something like a concat or other evaluation. All right. So any other questions on this particular scenario? Gives us quite a bit of flexibility to get those values rolled up. And again, we've got good ability to use those conditional values to either roll up or average the values themselves, or even just count the records. If you wanted to know how many of them were approved versus not approved, you could use the same technique and just count if they're not approved, and then count the entirety of them and compare those values in the calculation. Make sense? Okay. Let's go touch on a couple other capabilities. One of the other things that is very commonly done with formulas is evaluating dates. And I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to do that. Here I've got another just demo application. I've got a due date field, and what I'm doing here is using a function called DATEDIFF. What DATEDIFF allows you to do is compare two dates and then output the difference in one of these units. So the third parameter for this function is actually the text of one of these options: minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, or years. In this case, I'm using days. I'm comparing, and this is a special function as well, now, which returns right now, today's date and time, so that I can compare today to some other date. And this is handy to go and create calculations like this. If I wanted a value that indicated whether or not I was under 30 days overdue on a task, that's easy with the DATEDIFF function. And here we're going to get an introduction to logic. You see my if statement. If allows you to evaluate some expression, and if it's true, it returns the first value. If it's false, it returns the second value. Now, this is the area where I was pointing out that you have to return the same type, meaning all of these have to be text, all of them have to be a date, or all of them have to be a number. Otherwise, you'll get an error that you've got a mismatch. Because when you've created your formula field, this field is being interpreted by the system as a text field, whereas this field is being interpreted as a number and you can evaluate it as such. It has all the same capabilities. You can use the same filtering. All of that type of stuff depends on this field returning one predictable type. So that's why you're constrained always.
Will that ever change? Will that functionality ever change? Someone's asking.
It's not planned anytime soon, just because of the architecture of field types right at the moment in SmartSuite, because all of these filters and groups are type dependent, and they're type dependent by field. So when I go in and select DATEDIFF, because it's a number, I'm returning these specific options: greater than, less than, equal to, or greater than. So there isn't any immediate term plan to change that. What you could probably do is use a value that's generated and set another value with an automation based on some result. So if you return to 0, maybe you would set a status field a certain way using an automation. And those are the types of kind of workflow things. We're going to do another webinar here pretty soon in the future, where we combine formulas along with automations to create an entire workflow, and show you some kind of tips and tricks for using formulas to either work around things that we're not currently supporting directly in automations yet, or just in certain circumstances, it's convenient to calculate a value and use that value to trigger an automation, which is worth stating here too. You can evaluate the result of a formula field in automations. So you can use it as a triggering criteria. You can, you obviously cannot directly set the value of a formula using an automation because it's fixed, it's generated by the system.
What about if you have one value returning a number and another value returning text? Would it just convert your number into text and just say, hey, this looks like a number, but it's actually text? If you're mixing.
Great question. You absolutely can do that. The net result of doing that is the field itself is treated as text, which is not always what you want, but it may be in certain cases where it's just important as display value and it's not important to see this as a number. If I go back into this formula, this SUMIF is returning a numeric value. I could wrap the SUMIF in a concat and do this. When I do that, it's basically taking this number value and it's going to go and convert it to text so that it prepends our currency symbol.
Do you have a function that will go the other way and take text into a number?
Let's see. I'm wondering if we support that yet. Brian, do you remember offhand?
I don't believe we do right now. That's part of our enhancements that we're looking at.
Yep, I'm pretty sure that one is on the radar, but not yet implemented.
Question here. Is it possible to calculate days until deadline with an if statement depending on the status of a task?
Days until deadline. Say that one more time. Days until deadline based on...
Yeah, with an if statement depending on the status of a task.
Yes, sure is. And let me show you a little bit of that. I'm using an if statement here just to determine whether or not this value is greater than -30, and then coming out with a yes or a no. You could absolutely create an if criteria that says, hey, I want to look at a status, and let's go somewhere that we have a status. I don't have a status field, so let's just add one here. My Zoom toolbar is hiding my UI. So let's say, and the scenario is with a date field, right? If you wanted to evaluate date, oh, I think I've already got one here. Depending on this status, I want to get that DATEDIFF value only if it equals a certain criteria. Am I getting that right?
Yes, I think that's exactly what he's asking.
Okay, so let's construct that. So I'm going to start with my status field. And by the way, another thing to note is that spacing is ignored. So to make it easier on yourself, and I frequently do this, I'll indent things so that I can see what goes with what, especially as you start getting into more complicated and nested formulas. It makes it a little bit easier to read, and the system ignores all the white space. It doesn't matter. So here I'm going to say if status is equal to in process, then what I want to do is DATEDIFF now date day, and otherwise, let's see, let's just return a 0. That validated. We're applying this as the criteria, and then only if that criteria is met am I going to return anything other than 0.
So quick question on that, Peter. How does SmartSuite return the true or false value for the if statement? Jared said for Airtable, it returns a value of 1 or greater for true and 0 for false.
So
we return that as text, right?
Say that one more time.
For the if status, how we return the true or false values.
Let's see. Basically, it's not returning that. It's just returning whatever the output of this statement is.
Return isn't the right value, the right word. What I'm saying is your conditional statement. Your conditional statement has an answer, and that usually is true or false.
Right.
Can the if handle receiving that conditional statement as being a value? Like if I say if 1 + 2, and then the answer to 1 + 2 is obviously 3, will that show up as a true? Because that's my conditional statement, so to speak, 1 + 2. And, or do you have to have an inequality in there so you get back an actual true or false? Because a lot of times I use a result saying anytime my result is 1 or greater, I know the if is saying that's true. Anytime the result is 0, the if is saying that's false. And that is a big benefit to how I write a lot of if statements in Airtable. I'm wondering, does your if statement have to receive an actual true or false? Because see, that's a true or false statement, you know. If 1 + 2 = 3, and again, I'm not really saying the true or false. I know it can give you a text, but what I'm saying is, instead of saying 1 + 2, can you just say, if I get a value that is 1 or larger, and just let that be my true or false? Or do I have to actually give a discrete yes or no?
You have to actually reference the value to evaluate, if I'm understanding the question correctly. So you have to feed this condition some sort of variable that can be evaluated. And generally the way that that's done is with a field value. So you're passing something into the formula, it's evaluating, and then if the statement is logically true, we return this value. If not, we return that value.
What if I'm referencing a field and I'm just saying, if this field has a value in it, give me true. If a field does not have a value in it, give me false.
We have a function for that. We have an is not null.
I see.
So here you would just say, if date is not null, display true. Make sense? So that's just evaluating the state of that field. Does it have a value or not? And you could do, thought we supported the not. Oh, you could do that as well. We have a not statement. So
it just
if
negates the statement.
It negates
so if
it. So
is null,
if this is not true, correct.
Okay, that's really weird because it's like a double negative.
Yes.
Well, wouldn't you just switch your true and false, like the values you would want? So like, let's say you have an action if true, an action if false. You would just use your is not null function, and you would just flip your true and false values.
Absolutely. A more common use for not would just be to say something like not status equals to.
Okay.
Or another option for that is to do status not equals complete with the
Yep.
exclamation point equals.
Oh, that's right. That's what I'm used to. And instead of having a function, just using the exclamation mark, because it seems like such a simpler version getting the same result.
Yep. And I think in the vast majority of cases, that's what you would do. There are also compounding statements. So you could say and to have multiple criteria. So if I wanted to say status is complete and DATEDIFF, that's a valid statement as well. I'm missing a comma. You can also do or. So if either one of these is true, then do this, otherwise do that. And while we're here digging into the into the depths of these things, it's worth mentioning that you could also embed another if statement here with all of these types of criteria as the output.
Peter, quick question. What does that exclamation mark do?
This?
Yes.
That means not equal.
Does that make sense, Daniel?
So either one equals sign or two to support the programmers out there who are used to equality being double equals, or not equals. So exclamation point equals is not equal. It's the Excel equivalent of that.
Huh.
Okay. Still making sense? Sometimes the syntax gets a little tricky, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to do this webinar, just to kind of run through some of these things, because I know that Excel, Airtable, Monday, ClickUp all have slightly different ways of doing pretty well the same things. We just have our own variant. And you can do a whole variety of interesting things with this. I wanted to show you, in addition to just this simple DATEDIFF evaluation, you can use if statements to do some pretty interesting things. So here, what I wanted to do is take a look at this number and kind of convert it into a human readable text value. So I want to know, are we under 30 days overdue? Are we between 30 and 60 days overdue? Are we 90 plus? And I might use this in a grouping or something so that I could see, and that's a good point too, you can use formula fields in things like grouping and filters and spotlights and all of the rest, so that you can use this value and say, uh-oh, this thing's 90 plus days overdue, I better pay attention to it. Constructing
Peter?
this, sure.
Can we trigger automations based on the result of a formula field?
Yes, you can use the result of a formula field to trigger an automation. Absolutely. You can use it as a criteria. And again, they show up as text, number, or date, and can be evaluated in the same way that those regular field types can.
And this is an instant trigger.
It is, and I'll put a little asterisk next to the word instant, in that they're actually processed asynchronously. So what happens is, anytime something needs to be recalculated, we go put it in a queue, and the system runs through that queue and makes all of the updates. So if you did something that would change, say you had 500 records in an application, and you make a change that would recalculate all of them, you may see a delay before some of them update. But again, you'll get that spinner icon that says, hey, something's going on with this value, the system's recalculating it. But they're not delayed intentionally or anything of the sort. They happen, they go into that queue as soon as that change is required.
And if I'm not mistaken, a formula updating is counted as the record updating, right? As far as automations go?
Yes. Yep. So a formula update is a record update. So you can trigger on record update to a formula field. Okay. Any other questions there?
What is the due date field?
What is the due date field?
Yes.
The
This
due
is
date field is just a date field that has a little bit of an extra capability. And here's the extra capability. It links to a status field. What that does is allow you, it does a couple of things. you can see where you're at today versus what this due date is. And we can also tell whether or not we're in a complete status. And let me show you what I mean by that. In your status field, one of these values, and soon multiple values, can be marked as a, quote, complete status. And the date field takes that into account, showing that it's been completed. Now, in this case, because this one was overdue, see that tiny little red dot? It means it's complete, but it was late. So that's really the only difference between a regular date and a due date, is just it's enabling some of these project management capabilities to be linked to the status and to show you where things are currently at.
So one of the things that I found is really beneficial to me from my experience in Airtable is simply the fact that simply by looking at the field name, I can tell what type of field it is, like a roll-up, a lookup, a function, text, long text, single select, double select. I can look at the field name and there's an actual symbol next to the field that tells me what type of field it is, regardless of the name of the field itself. And I don't get that from the grid view.
You know, it's interesting because people are significantly divided on that particular issue. We originally showed it in the grid, but then people were complaining that it took up too much space and they couldn't see the titles of the fields. So we removed it, and we've had a number of requests just like yours to say, hey, I really like that. It's useful to me. Could you include it? We do include it currently on in the edit record modal. So if you have any question about what one of these is, you actually even get a little pop-up that gives you the field type, but we're not currently displaying it in grid.
What about making it optional?
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. We're talking about having more of a general, like an application or a solution level options type of interface where you could set things like that. Like, hey, I do or do not want to see icons. I do or do not want colors. I do or do not want, certain types of formatting options so that you can kind of dial things in and get it just the way that you like.
Right. I think that would be like by view, because if you're working with multiple people, I make my personal views for how I like to see things. Same thing with like you force everything to be all caps. I find it beneficial to specify when I want it all caps, when I want lowercase. But if you force every field name to be all caps, you lose that functionality.
No, those are great ideas. I'd really encourage you to submit those as enhancement requests. We take those seriously, especially our UI elements, because we're very aware that these little usability things make a big difference, and we're trying to address them, in kind of the priority order for number of requests. So if everyone jumps on and says, yes, those are life changers for me, they really make things more usable, they will absolutely get attention sooner than later.
The last comment I had on this was a huge thing for me is the ability to convert fields to other fields. And in Airtable, any field I have, I can convert it to any other field at any time. And in fact, I use it as a technique where, like, for example, if I have a single line text field and the values in that field match linked records in another app, then if I convert it, a single line text field, to a linked record field, it will literally convert all of those texts into links, and it will essentially do all the linking for me. Because it recognizes, hey, I see you have fields with these same names. I'm just going to link those records to this field since you want to convert it. But in this case, you can only very limitedly convert a field. I would have to delete it and create a brand new field if I want to convert certain fields to different field types.
No, it's a great point, and something that's been brought to our attention by just a large number of Airtable users, or hopefully former Airtable users for at least a few of them, in that capability that they provide is really flexible. We initially erred on the side of only doing things where we could guarantee that the data was preserved properly. So, when you go to convert a number of different field types, you get a limited set of options, right? We're only allowing you to take this to text or into a date field, just so that we make sure if you switched it to a number field, we'd lose the context. We wouldn't be able to display that data because it's invalid. Recognizing this, especially coming from the text field type, that's the first one we're going to focus on, because a lot of people, it seems, like to kind of add text fields quickly, get things all kind of ordered the way that they want, and then they go back and decide which field types they want. Hey, this one actually has linked record values. This one has date values or whatever, because you've imported from a spreadsheet. We want to give you that same capability. And incidentally, while we're talking about importing, we're also going to add the ability to add fields and or create new apps, similar to what Airtable is doing there during that import process. So if you've got a large application, you've already got all of that data in the spreadsheet, you'll just be able to suck it in and automatically create the app.
Hey, Peter, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So someone was testing today and they were not able to sum with a rolling up the time tracked field, and only with formulas.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Or
yes, that is a good point. So if we go back to our invoice example, that would be kind of the intuitive thing, right? You want, I'm thinking that, hey, I'm going to go roll up my line item values, and I'm going to go select my subtitle or subtotal rather is not there as an available option. This is something that we're going to add, but it's not currently available. But again, fortunately, formula to the rescue, you can do that roll up in the formula. And actually the formula gives you a lot more capability. You've got that conditional summing capability. It is a little bit more complicated to set it up. So we recognize that people will want to pull those calculated values in through the roll up. It's just not available in production yet. Okay. Any other questions in the queue?
I actually wanted to get to some date questions because that's one of the biggest sort of challenges in Airtable.
Okay.
And just sort of shoot off two. One is, I noticed that your date time format capabilities are very limited to just 3 different types. I think it's like standard, it's like standard, long, and compact or something like that. Whereas in Airtable, you have tokens that can be explicitly, like, I can literally format any type of date you can possibly think of, as opposed to having those small limits. And then the other question was about time zones and like formatting dates as numbers. Like if I just write out a date, and again, I asked you about that, if you can convert like text to number or something like that, like converting a date to text, or I'm sorry, converting a date to a number by just sort of taking the numbers itself individually, no spaces, no commas, just a date with a bunch of numbers, and treating it like a number has been infinitely beneficial for me in so many of my Airtable systems. I'm just wondering if there's some type of way where you could do that inside of SmartSuite.
Let me show you what we currently have. So in addition to our date diffs, we do have functions that allow you to return the parts of the date: day, hour, year, month. There's a quarter function. So you can break it up. If I wanted to do, I'll do this. I don't know why that returned bad. I think we validated, didn't we? Oh, this is the other issue. And, again, sort of fall on the sword time. We have due date isn't compatible with a few of these, whereas the date field is. Due date is actually kind of what we call internally, it's a complex field. because it has a number of different things in it. It's not just a date value, it's got a bunch of stuff relating it to that status record and so forth. So we've got a few of these that we have to fix up. Let me find.
Peter,
Is this one of the ones that we fixed? You're right. Eagle Eye Brian. Okay, good. We fixed that one. I know that we had that issue in a couple of different places, but so you can take parts of the date and use them for a variety of things. In fact, I had one formula where I was comparing the now values of day, month, and year to another dates to figure out if a particular record matched today's date. So there are a bunch of things that you can do with those functions. Now, you were saying that you returned dates as numeric values. Are you talking about like Unix timestamp dates, or
No.
what was the use case for doing that?
Usually, because of time zones, there's a lot of discrepancies with greater than, less than. So there's the, is greater than, is less than for dates, and things like that. And I found that in order to ignore all of the misconceptions of, hey, this is a date and this time zone, that time zone, I'll just convert it to a number. And there have been a few other things, like if I want to match a date, like say, does this date equal that date? I know there's a function that says date time equals or something like that. But sometimes when I literally convert it to a numerical value, like an actual number. So instead of saying 2022 9/28, it's an actual number. I can't remember exactly the place value. So it'd be like 2000, maybe 2000, it'd be 10,000. Anyways, it would be a long string of numbers, but those numbers would represent the date, if that makes sense. And it's like it's where I would, in Airtable, we have a value function. And anything you put in the value function, it converts it to a number. Technically, even text, it will just convert it to a number. And so I'll take a date and I'll format it so I only show year, month, day, and I'll convert that to a number. And then it's a number. And then in the same way, Colette is asking date time phrase function, which essentially does the opposite, where it takes a string and convert it into a date. So that's another question that she had.
And that one is yes. Let's see, year, month, day. This will turn it into a string.
So that's close to what I'm thinking. And now turning that number, that string, into an actual number. So I can ask mathematical questions like greater than, less than, equal to.
I see. Yeah, gotcha. At this point, we have a date function, and it'll try to evaluate a string and interpret it as a date. Of course, the title field isn't supported there, but I don't know that I've got text in here. But it'll, in a variety of different formats, this will try to create a date out of a text field. Unfortunately, we don't have a corresponding number function right at the moment, but that's another thing that's on the list, is try to interpret whatever's in here as a number.
Is that something you're going to be coming out with in the future? Because that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that's something that is on the list for sure. While we're talking about numeric values for things, I should also mention kind of a little known feature, and it has to do with single and multiple select lists. Let's say that this is, we'll call this rating. Select lists have an expand function that give you some additional options. One of those options is to include a numeric value for it. So if I wanted to give my value of high a numeric value of 5, and then maybe 3, and then 1. Now that I have this rating field, and let's give ourselves a high value. Let's go back into our formula. You can reference the numeric value of that field with this numeric value function. And that, instead of returning the actual text, returns that value as a number. And that can be used just as a number within a more complex formula or whatever you want to do.
What if I change the text? Will it still reference the number?
Sure will. It's also kind of a nice safety valve. So if you're going to be changing those text values, you'll know that you still have a numeric value that stays static. It's also handy for doing things like, calculators. We work with a bunch of risk management folks who do like risk ratings, where they have a formula that weights things differently and they can give different values to different responses. So it's handy for a variety of applications, but kind of little known function, but can be very useful in formulas. All right, other questions? I know we're a little bit over scheduled time, but I'm perfectly happy to hang out for a few more minutes if people have additional questions.
How do you do time zones? How do you handle time zones with SmartSuite?
Time zones are a little interesting. So all date fields are stored in UTC. Your profile then at two different levels. At the workspace level as a default, here you'll see I've got time zone set as the default for this particular, and we're in GMT in this example, but that value can be overridden by the individual user in their preferences. And if I go down to my general preferences and see that I can specify my own time zone, locale, and language. All of the number values that get displayed back to me then from a date field are translated into my time zone. Now, the sort of eccentricity of formulas right at the moment is that the values are returned back in the user's time zone. And when a formula calculates that value, it gets stored in that time zone's value, translated back to UTC, but whoever created that calculation, basically that's the time zone that's being used for the evaluation. We're planning to add a function that allows you to specify the time zone that you want to return a time value in and display it that way. So we're in a bit of an intermediate state. There are certain circumstances where you get values that seem a little off if you've got international users who are looking at something in a different time zone, because it's been calculated applying some type of operation in the time zone of the creating user. I know that's a little complicated and not tremendously straightforward, which is why we're trying to make it more explicit.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. But we're aware of kind of the edge cases that you can get yourself into with time zones. It seems like every day we're talking about a time zone related impact to something. It does get a little interesting to manage. The other thing there, the hour function, let's pick my due date again. The hour function right now is a little strange because it uses, and I must have forgotten something. It uses the locale of the current user to pull that value, or the configuring user. So, oh yeah, messed up my paren. So if I'm in a locale and configuring this formula and I have a 12-hour locale time format configured, it'll give me this hour value in 12-hour time. If I'm in a locale that supports 24, then you get the 24-hour version. We're going to enhance this to allow you to specify which you would like to return. So just a minor note, but came up with, we had a user that was trying to do something similar to the use cases that we were just talking through, and building a text value with various components of that date field. And this one came back a little strange because they were in Europe and expected, 14 to come back instead of 2. All right. Anything else? Emma, do we have any questions listed in the chat?
No, they're all answered.
Excellent. All right.
thanks for joining, everyone. Thanks for your
Yeah,
questions.
thanks everyone. And if you find that you have additional questions as you're building your formulas or working with automations, feel free to post them in the community. If there are things that you think are missing or could do better, or we missed some additional feature to that function, just please post them to our feature requests, because I look at them, the entire development team looks through them, and we do prioritize based on request volume. So go in and vote for the things that you really want as well, and they'll rise up, to the top part of our roadmap. All right. Thanks everyone for coming. Enjoyed it.